So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Really exciting to chat to you for Dublin's first Climate Action Week, and huge thanks to our hosts in Dublin Down, who are kind of putting the program together and leading things with, I think, over 70 events. It's really been a jam-packed week, and some fantastic talks already. But you're all very welcome to the Smart Sandyford talk on joining the dots. And really, what we're going to be talking today is, in the context of climate change, what's actually happening in terms of research on the ground and who's working together, but also what are the methods and tools that are available to you to work with those partners to develop your own projects or come with us and develop research that can actually make an impact on climate change. We really do want this to be an interactive session as much as possible. So there's a Q&A at the bottom of your screens. It'd be great if you can put your questions in, and as soon as we've left a lot of time at the end for a Q&A, really to find out where the gaps are and get that discussion going with the panelists. And I'm going to be talking with a great panel today, and I'll introduce each one of them before they speak. But to quickly go through it, Ronan is from the Down County Council. Brian is a professor in Trinity College Dublin Engineering, and Salim is a lecturer in IT Sligo, working on one of the major European research projects, SCORE, which he's going to be detailing for us later. In terms of what we're going to be talking about today, so I'll give a quick background and flavor of what the Smart Sandyford program is, some of our fun projects that are actually making a big difference. So they're more than just interesting for the researchers. I think they're really having an impact across the county and indeed Dublin itself. Then detailing a little bit more on how that collaborative research works. It's all well and good saying we all work together, it's happy clappy, but what's the actual approach? What are the mechanisms that allow us to do that in terms of the funding and the dynamics between the different partners on these projects? And then we'll look at the outputs of that collaboration. So Brian's going to give some detail on the local research. We've had huge success in Dún with the coastal mobility route and the associated cycling infrastructure recently, and really promoting active travel. But now looking at building data sets and actually understanding the impact they're having. It's all well and good having an opinion on what should be done, but unless you have the data to back it up, it's just an opinion. So that's a really, really interesting talk from Brian. And then we'll look at more of the international stage then with Salim, who's going to be talking about that SCORE EU project that I talked about, which really focuses on flooding and the Dublin coastal city living lab. If half the predictions are correct about the level of flooding we can expect, this kind of research is going to be really important. And as I said, we've left a good 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So please do start putting your questions, anything that pops into your head while we're going through or while any of the speakers are talking, and then we'll get to it at the end. Heard a lot this week already about the impacts, the growing disasters and all of that. It was pretty clear over the summer. I think I mentioned in the email shot that I sent out, we had the fires on Howth burning for about 6 weeks. We had floods across Dublin, and even outside my own house, my neighbours were flooded there just with an hour of rain in Dún. So it really can quickly change. I think that was a pretty good image that they had in The Economist of the cars floating like dead fishes, I think was the caption, in the German floods, the fires all around California and in Siberia as well, really having a massive impact. So this very much is happening now already. And I think while it's all well and good talking about the sustainability projects and trying to minimize the impact, that's a really important first step. But I think it's clear that we need to really start now focusing as well on the resilience of our communities and starting to build that up and being ready for what's going to come and start to affect Dublin down the road. In terms of what we're doing and our work in Smart Sandyford, for those who don't know, Smart Sandyford is basically a research program where we test new technologies to address mobility and climate change are the main objectives. And we work across Dún Down, and we take the challenges and ideas from across the council and working with the academic partners, and then we test them in this test bed in Sandyford. And in essence, it's that collaboration piece, and that's the point of the talk, is everybody working together is going to be the key to address these climate issues. No one academic can come up with an idea, but until it's put into practice through the council or with industry partners, it stays an idea. Similarly, the council can have all the ideas and the on the ground know-how, but until you have those the academic rigor to back up and assess, sometimes it doesn't get the same level of kudos. So working together is clearly the way forward, and that's what we're trying to talk about today. What we have in the program is called a quadruple helix, which simply means we have these 4 key stakeholders: the local government, academic partners, industry partners, and then the actual people on the ground, the citizens, the local people who have to be the priority in everything we do. And obviously we're going to have the talks from Ronan, Brian and Salim, who will go into more detail about how the government academia partnership works. But interestingly, we have a couple of projects now going beyond just catering to citizens, now looking at involving citizens in our projects. So citizen scientists, actually getting people to gather their own data so that they're involved in the process, and they're not just seeing a post or an email shot or a social media post with some stats. They're actually involved in developing that information, and then they're more they've bought into the system a little bit more, and they're more invested to see change and know what's going on. In terms of our own objectives, I mentioned mobility, climate change, and that point of having urban resilience now going forward. And these tie in well with the UN Sustainability Development Goals. So number 11 is sustainable cities and communities. And then number 13, of course, is climate change. And that really ties in with this week's talks. Brian's going to detail better than I can on the cycling infrastructure that Dún Laoghaire and his team and the DLR Active Travel testbed are working on. But we have done a lot of work with local companies assessing the needs of or assessing the challenges rather of the county as a whole. So this is a recent survey. We looked at what the trends were for people commuting into Dún Laoghaire and out of Dún Laoghaire each morning. And what we found was there was a huge issue with people with relatively short journeys still using their cars. And it was actually, I think 59% of women were driving and 40% of men. There were a range of reasons for this. And a lot of it was to do with being afraid of what was the level of infrastructure available, but also the services, other associated services like shower facilities and that kind of thing weren't there for them. Interestingly as well, despite the high proportion of cars, we asked people to rate their satisfaction with their journeys, and by far the people driving were the least satisfied, and they seemed to spend the most time per distance in the car, which was obviously quite frustrating for them. And the active travel, actually I exaggerate. There were 3 motorcyclists, and they were all 100% happy with their journeys. But after that, the active travel people, the walkers and the cyclists were the most satisfied with their journey. So Brian's going to talk a little bit more and give a bit more of an example on those local examples. We also work on a range of major EU projects. So Precinct SCORE, SCORE is the one Salim is going to talk about urban resilience, and then Pro Bono is our sustainability project. And really, these projects bring international expertise from academics and industry partners, other cities from across Europe, all working together. So across these 3 projects, we have Dún Laoghaire Down or Dublin acting as a test bed for these new technologies and industries. In Precinct, we're looking at the resilience of infrastructure. In SCORE, we're looking at climate and building resilience for flooding. And in Pro Bono, we're looking at enhancing our buildings and making them more sustainable. But to give you an example of how big these are, or what these projects are like, these are multi-million euro projects. And in terms of Pro Bono, we had 5 EU experts review 170 applications, 114 were shortlisted, and our project was one of 3 that was funded. And there, along with Madrid, Dún Laoghaire Down or Dublin is going to be one of the lead flagship cities for the European Green Deal. And that really shows how I suppose, the nature of having those strong relationships between a local authority and UCD, Trinity, DCU, IDT, all of these impressive third level bodies right on our doorstep is so important, and why Dublin is becoming this this core test bed for these technologies going forward. And I have these couple of slides in which are going to talk about a little bit more detail about pro bono, but I think what would be better, we can come back to that, but I think it'd be more interesting to hand over to Ronan now, who's going to talk about really from that local authority side, what's going on. And just to give Ronan's background, Ronan is the Digital Strategy Officer for Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown, and he's also the Smart Dublin representative, working across the region, but representing Dún Laoghaire again. And Ronan's work ranges across technologies, but basically trying to digitalize the county and enhancing services. And I think the innovation piece is really cool in terms of what he's built and building those collaborations. So Ronan, over to you to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Conor. Thanks very much for the very generous introduction. I'm not going to do slides as such. I'm just going to speak from notes. But what I will do is, over the course of the next few minutes, give you an idea of my background, my role, and what my take, or what Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown's take is on our approach to data, to research, and to climate. So as Conor mentioned, I'm the Digital Strategy Officer with Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown. That's my main role. Other roles that I also have include I'm the Open Data Liaison Officer, so I have responsibility for ensuring that as much of our non-personal data as possible gets published as open data and is available and reusable by anyone who wants to get their hands on it. I'm the DLR Smart Dublin rep. I'm also the broadband officer and the innovation rep. So these are roles that I've taken on since I joined Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown as digital strategy officer in May of 2017. And in May of 2017, when I joined the organization, the essential task of the digital strategy officer was to look at the digital transformation of the organization. And specifically, there were two aspects of that. We were all about changing how, or making local government more effective from the perspective of the councillor and from the perspective of the citizen. So two of the major projects that I would have headed up at the time, one was building out a new council chamber and making it future-proofed, allowing it to have all the capacity around electronic voting and remote meetings and all of that. And that sits up on the third floor here in County Hall, and directly beneath that was the other aspect of the project, which is our civic hub. And the reason that I mentioned these two projects is because they're the visible aspect of how a modern democratic organization is changing and is run. So if you imagine the council chamber sitting on top and the civic hub below. The Civic Hub is where we do all of the communications with our citizens in and out of the organisation. So before we had the Civic Hub, we would have had maybe up to a dozen different points where people could come in and talk to us about housing or about environment. But now we have this, if you imagine it as a filter, the very top, the council chamber where all the decisions are made. And below that, all of those decisions filter down and are implemented. And all of the service requests that we get from our citizens come in through the Civic Hub and they're fed back up. So you have this kind of a filter where decisions are flowing down and where the information is flowing up. So in the middle of all of that, you obviously have to have an engine to manage all of that information and all of those service requests. So I suppose the most while it was a challenge to build out a new chamber and a challenge to build out a new civic hub, the real challenge was to put the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure in place in the middle that could capture all of the service requests and ensure that everything we do is transparent, is tracked, and is measured, and ultimately that it generates data that we can use so that we get to that great place of data-driven decision making. That's essentially what it's about. So now that's digital transformation. And when people talk about digital transformation, they invariably think of things like IoT, artificial intelligence, machine learning, remote working, getting the tools into the hands of your workers out on the ground that can make their life a lot easier. But transformation, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it's a much bigger challenge nowadays, because while I came in to the organization to look at the transformation of the organization, in my role as broadband officer, I also had to build out a digital strategy for the county. So you're talking about the digital transformation of the county as well. And then you're just in the door and storms start hitting and you realize that the real transformation, the real challenge here, and then you have a pandemic, it's not necessarily around digital transformation. The actual challenge is crisis transformation, climate transformation, and civil transformation when you're hit with a pandemic and everybody has to change how they work and how they live overnight and get used to doing things in new ways. So I suppose coming from that, it would be important, and Conor has already mentioned this, this is part of how we work within the Smart Dublin ecosystem, that there has always been this helix approach, where it's government working with industry and academia and with citizens in order to figure out the really, really difficult questions that are posed to local authorities nowadays. So within our digital strategy program of work, we would have projects under 4 broad headings around infrastructure, economy, skills, and government. So I suppose under infrastructure, we'd have projects like putting sensors into manholes so that we know if they're opened, so we can manage our own duct infrastructure. Under economy, we would have projects like our e-cargo bike, which is a sustainable transport project, but it's also a business support project as well. Then under skills, we would have projects like digital inclusion, where we're trying to bring together all of the resources that are already in place and make them available so that we're tackling digital literacy. And under government, we would have things like, as I mentioned before, our open data initiatives and projects like voter.ie. But these projects are only really possible by working together, across academia, government, citizens. I suppose, am I overemphasizing this? Perhaps, but I suppose the important part of this, the core work of a local authority, is the provision of services. And there's a national project going on at the minute trying to quantify what all of our services are. And I would have been involved in the early days of that project, because when I talk about the engine at the center of the organization that tries to capture and measure all of the service requests, obviously you need a database or a catalog of all the services. Local authorities in general provide anything from 800 plus services. So if you imagine the complexity and the range of services that we provide, and if you imagine then add on top of that climate crisis, a pandemic, then obviously you're into a place very soon where we don't and can't have the answers. But how do you get to the answers? I suppose you start with data, you start with the question, you try to gather up the data, you do some research, you figure out what the best action to take. But you can only do that if you have that partnership already in place across the 4 cohorts. So I suppose that's really, in essence, what we're about in our approach to data and to research and to the climate. We need to have the capacity to ask really difficult questions that we don't know the answers to, and to come up with research that points us in the right direction, and to share that knowledge and that learning with other local authorities and with other bodies who would be able to use it. So I hope that gives a flavour of what we're about. Conor mentioned some of the EU projects that we're involved in. It would be important to state that not alone through having these kind of strong partnerships with academia and with our citizens and with industry, it doesn't just lead to better solutions. It leads to a place where we're creating a test bed so we can figure out the best way forward. And I suppose I would close with the remark that the direction I see all of this going is that organizations such as local authorities that provide such a huge range of complex services, we're trying to get to a place where by partnering up, the organization becomes its own research engine. Thanks, Conor.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Ronan. I think that's a really nice way to summarize it as well, as its own research engine. And I think just from working with Ronan and the team, we've seen huge strides in developing links across IADT, UCD, Trinity in the last couple of years. That there are now this stream of projects coming on to help build that. And we're seeing value for both stakeholders and the local citizens as well because of that. I'm going to hand over now to Brian, and we'll come back. I have a few questions for you, Ronan, which we might get to at the end. But I'm going to hand over to Brian, Professor Brian Caulfield, who's the head of discipline in the School of Engineering, and he's regularly heard on the radio as a leading expert in mobility. So we're absolutely delighted to have you on, Brian. Thank you very much for your time. And I will share your slides here now. And if you just want to give me a nod, I'll go on to the next slide.
Super, Conor. Thanks very much for the introduction. And I have to thank Conor for organizing this event. Conor is a force of nature in himself and getting these things done and getting us to do things. So it's great, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all here this morning. So the work that I'm involved in, Conor's one of the people that is working on the project, as well as is Robert Egan and myself, and it's around the Dún Laoghaire active travel test bed. So this project has been co-funded through Enable and SFI and DLR, and as part of the project, we're looking at two main specific things. One around parking in bike parking in DLR, but then also around the cargo bikes, which Ronan mentioned. And Ronan as well Ronan has been fantastic, as is Robert Burns, in terms of the time that they've given us and the direction and the on the street knowledge that they have is vital. So it's all very well and good enough going off and developing these very sophisticated and elaborate traffic and statistical models, but without the actual, this is how it's actually going to work. The research can kind of, diverge away from what a real solution would be for DLR. So Conor, if I could go to the next slide, please. So how it works, it is this nexus that Conor was talking about the four different parts. And I suppose the active travel testbed project is a really good example of this, in that we have Trinity through Enable and the access to all the amazing researchers we have in Enable and Connect in Trinity. That have a wealth of experience of looking at these projects and seeing how you can make solutions work. Then we have an amazing partner in DLR who see the benefits that someone like Trinity can bring to how these solutions could change life for people in DLR. And I live in DLR, so I've seen a lot of these things face to face and see how they work and see them that they are working in the community. So there's Enable and Trinity and DLR. Then you also get private enterprise that are involved as well. And particularly in our case, it's Bleeper, and Bleeper are involved in the cargo bikes. And I'm going to speak about them in a few minutes when I talk about the cargo bikes. But having a company like Bleeper it's manner of heaven to an academic. You go in and you ask, can we have data? Yes, Brian, what you need? Brian, can we do this? Yes, no problem whatsoever. It's always been an open door with them, and they've been a fantastic company for me to work with before I got involved in the DLR testbed. But I know specifically throughout the Smart Dublin and across the county, they've been fantastic. And it's very much a can-do attitude, and they do see the benefit of the research that we bring. But then it's the citizens, because ultimately they're the people that we're trying to make changes happen for. And those are the ones that we're studying essentially in something like the active travel test bed. And using all four of those together to come up with solutions using technology, but using technology, using know-how, using our experience, but then also using the cop on and common sense that comes from working with people that are on the ground in this. And as Ronan said, at the moment it's a very exciting time to be working in the local authorities, particularly if you're a workaholic, because of the amount of work that they have to do at the moment. And that's why I think over the past 2 or 3 years, they've really been leveraging and leaning upon the universities to help in terms of solving some of the problems. One of the things I say to my students, and on Monday, I got to see my students face to face for the first time since, I think, was it March 2020, which was amazing. But one of the things I always say to them is that if you don't count it, it doesn't count. So transport is littered with people with opinions, and I'm one of them. But unless you have the science to back it up, unless you have the numbers and the facts and figures, it doesn't count. And that's what's vital, I think, about this, the DLR testbed project. That you have the numbers and you have the science, and we're working with the council trialing things. And that's one of the things that we've been afraid to do for decades in transport, is try things and see if they work. Look at the coastal mobility route, see if it works. It is working amazingly, and it will be taken out under pain of death, I think. But those kind of piece of infrastructure work, and there's examples. The coastal mobility route wasn't the first one in Ireland. If you look at the Mayo Greenway, that in its time was revolutionary as well. And every other county in Ireland wanted one straight away. But like, when we did initial work with the guys in Mayo on that as well, and we showed them the figures, we showed them the facts. We said, this is the benefit cost ratio. For every euro you spend on this greenway, it will generate 14 euro for the economy. And that's the benefit of having the likes of me and other academics involved in these types of projects. So Conor, if I can go on to the next slide. I don't have masses of slides here. I'm much more interested in the questions and talking and getting feedback. So there's this slide and one more slide. And so this slide basically is from DLR. And a couple of months ago, we did a survey and we were asking people, this is around parking. So one of the things around cycle parking is there's no evidence around there. There's no evidence out there. There's very little academic literature published on it. There's textbooks on how we park our cars and how we leave them 95% of the time, monuments to climate waste. Whereas with cycling, there's very little information. Cycling is an enabler, obviously, parking is an enabler to cycling, like it is with cars. When you have secure, safe, covered parking, or all of the other different types of parking we're looking at in this project, it encourages people to cycle more. And when we were starting this project, we met with Robert Burns, and he gave this analogy, and it stuck in my head ever since, about a pipe network. And you were looking at transport as almost as water flowing through a pipe network. And if there's one connection that's broken, it'll start to seep. And the seepage is when people are cycling and they don't have secure, safe parking. They're not secure that the bike is going to be there when they come back. Then they can start to go into, say, driving or using a bus. So the idea of the project is almost to try and stop these leakages happening across DLR. Here you can see Dún Laoghaire. We looked at the whole county as to where we were going to put the parking. This was done by Robert Egan in Trinity with Conor as well, and an input from me, but also a lot of input from DLR as well. You know, the GIS officer in DLR was very involved in this. So it's a real collaboration. So what we're at the moment is we're looking at the different parking stands that are there. And we're looking at these heat maps to see where people that conducted the survey decided this is where they need parking. These were the pinch points. So I think on Monday there's a team of us going around Dún Laoghaire to look at the ideal spaces to put this parking. And this is the nexus happening. You know, the academics, we've come along, we've done the research, the citizens have engaged. They've said this is where they want this parking to be placed. And then on Monday, we're going to walk around with DLR and say, look, well, this will work here, this will work here, and then come up with a solution and hopefully launch it soon. And then you'll be able to see I suppose the fruit of our research on the street in Dún Laoghaire, and then hopefully it will spread out across the rest of the county as the research directs. And that's one of the kind of, I suppose, that's one of the key things about this part of the project is that the DLR are trusting us, that we've gone off and we've looked at the international research and we've seen, you know, what could work. Now we're going to trial it, and if it doesn't work, you know, we could move it somewhere else and we could look to see where we could get a better bang for our buck in terms of the parking. So this has been massively exciting because you're literally going through all of the stages that Conor and Ronan mentioned initially. So Conor, if I could get my last slide, please. So this is the second part of the project that Ronan mentioned, that Conor mentioned at the start, and it's the bleeper bike, the cargo bike trial. This is an amazing project, and I think, you know, we're ever since it was launched, and maybe even the day before it was launched in DLR, these cargo bikes I've really taken off across Ireland and across the world. I know at Velo City in Lisbon, virtually in Lisbon, last week, it was a very hot topic. And even if you listen to the radio, you hear the zero emission deliveries that have been talked about in Dublin city centre. So again, this is another great example of this nexus, whereby the guys in Bleeper are working with the team in Smart Sandyford and in Enable and in DLR. They've provided a number of these cargo bikes across the county. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at who's using these cargo bikes, what trips are being swapped out for them. So again, back to the theory around it, if it isn't counted, it doesn't count. Obviously, this is going to be much better than a diesel or a petrol van chugging around. But we want to be able to quantify what the emission savings are from these cargo bikes. So then we can go back and look for more policy support around it, and to say, for every euro that's invested in terms of the cargo bikes, for example, this is the emissions that will be abated because of it. And that's a vital thing for local authorities to be able to understand. It's definitely a first in Ireland in terms of having the researchers in there from the ground floor. And we've had discussions with all of the companies. We've had sessions on Zoom about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and they're all bought into it. We'll also get data from Bleeper on when the bikes are being used, and then we'll be able to present all of this information. And one of the things about DLR and Dún Laoghaire itself as well is that it's very kind of, in terms of the geography, in terms of the people and the numbers, etc. It's similar to lots of towns and counties around Ireland. So the results that hopefully that we can see that happen, and that the results so far have been very positive, that we can extrapolate out of DLR, could be used in any part of Ireland. And you can see and you will be able to see the benefits of it, but specifically around the carbon that's saved. And that's the key thing. And that's the key currency, I suppose, that we have at the moment. And the 51% emissions reduction that we have to hit in less than 8.5 years is massive. Cargo bikes are not a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. But initiatives like this are so important. And again, hats off to DLR and to Bleeper for driving this one forward. And it really has been, I think it's been very much a passion project on behalf of DLR and also on behalf of Bleeper. So that's it. As I said, I didn't want to go through lots and lots of slides. So I assume we'll take questions at the end, but thank you very much, everybody, for your attention.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Brian. I think we probably could have done a whole webinar just on the cargo bikes alone. So I'll come back, and it's great to see the Q&A starting to fill up and a few in the comments as well. So please do keep adding your questions there. We're going to turn now to Dr. Salam Garbia from IT Sligo. Salam has put together a consortium from across Europe, been successful in one of the major grants, and now is running the SCORE project, which Dublin Rat Down is a partner on through the Smart Sandyford program. Salam, I'd say you're a busy man with with getting that project started up.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Conor, for the invitation to be part of this very interesting discussion. Yeah, and like, it's always great working with you, and it wouldn't be possible without all the help from you, Ronan, and all the partners. So yeah, it's been a journey, and it's going to be a journey for 4 years, and hopefully we'll get where we want in terms of the impact and how we can increase the resilience of our cities. So I suppose what I'm going to do now I just have a very little presentation just to give the audience some sort of an idea of what is a SCORE exactly and what we're trying to do. And likewise, Brian, we're really interested in hearing questions, comments, discussions, and feedback from everybody here. So hopefully we'll try to leave time for that. So SCORE is basically smart control of the climate resilience in European coastal cities. And it's a Climate Action Horizon 2020 project started just 1 month before, and will be working on this topic for 4 years with 28 partners across all Europe and Turkey, with some very interesting case studies to tackle extreme events, especially flooding and coastal erosions. And we will come up with an integrated solution that will involve everybody. And that's basically the main idea of what we're of SCORE approach. Conor, if you go next, please. Yeah, so what we're trying to do in a SCORE, as I said, is to have an integrated, transferable, scalable solution at the end of the 4 years that we can use to increase the climate resilience against extreme events in coastal cities. And to do that, we are developing what we call coastal city living labs, which is basically a virtual platform that will allow citizens, academics, researchers, different stakeholders, and most importantly, also the city councils and local governmental bodies to sit together, co-design, co-create the solutions, and that will, will make sure that we take every single opportunity to include everybody in co-designing, co-creating the solution. So we reduce, we increase the public acceptance for the solution, and we make sure that it functions for everybody. As part of a SCORE, we are starting with 10 cities as our test cities, if you want. And in each of those cities, we will establish those coastal city living labs in order to test our integrated approach to provide the package how other cities, can be adopted by other cities to increase climate resilience. So in Ireland, we have Dublin and Sligo, obviously with the layer of Dowling County Council. We have Gansing in Poland, Samsun in Turkey, Cooper in Slovenia, Massa in Italy, Barcelona in Spain, Alicante in Spain, Lisbon in Portugal, and Bilbao in Spain. Those are the 10 cities. So what we're trying to do is the integrated solution will be a solution that comes with nature-based solution part, or hybrid nature-based solution part, or ecosystem-based solution, whatever the name obviously there are some differences between them, but that would be the base of the solution that we will co-design, co-implement with the coastal city living lab members, which include citizens, local governmental bodies, and researchers. And we have also our digital twin solution that will basically work on connecting the cities in order to learn from each other. And that's what is, I would say, very innovative about SCORE. In the SCORE, we have 10 work packages. Those work packages will basically form 4 stages from foundation actions to evidence building to consultation, consolidation and synergy and exploitation actions. Yeah, Conor, can you go next, please? Yeah, so the main concept of SCORE, as I said, is to develop a solution that can be transferable, scalable. So what we're trying to do is to develop a package that by the end of the project will be able to, any city in Europe or the world will be able to scale, will adopt SCORE approach in order to increase climate resilience. So we'll start with establishing the Coastal City Living Lab and put together the framework of how citizens, city councils, researchers, engineers, and different stakeholders can work together and co-design, co-create the solution. Then we'll put together co-design criteria on how we can design ecosystem-based approaches in order to increase climate resilience in the cities. Then how we can connect that to our smart technologies and digital platforms, so we can allow the knowledge transfer between the cities, and how, so basically we don't repeat the same mistake twice. And then all of that will be running through our Coastal City Living Lab concept. So everybody will be involved in the process, so we don't leave anybody behind, and we make the solution function for everybody and accepted by everybody, and that's very important. Can we go next, please, Conor? So what this slide is basically just to give you some sort of an idea what we're trying to do in each of the cities. So as you can see, in each of those cities, we have some sort we have our main challenges or hazards caused by climate change, and what kind of impacts that can happen if we don't intervene. And SCORE will basically work on those challenges using the same approach in order to increase the resilience. So by the end of the project, we will have the platform, the cookbook for the cities, and the experience, how we can increase climate resilience within this integrated approach, and how cities can learn from each other. So in some of the activities, we have front-runner cities and follower cities, and not all the cities will be front-runners for all the activities, and they'll not be also followers for all the activities. So they'll be switching between front-runners and follower based on the experience before that they have. So for example, in Dublin, they would have a lot of front-runner roles because all the projects and investments from the government and from the local governmental bodies and from the EU, in building those experience and those researchers. So they'll be having front-runner roles on some of the activities, and will be followers in other activities that they would need maybe some more expertise to be developed. So we allow this knowledge transfer between the cities and how we can learn from each other. Now, what is unique about the SCORE is the involvement of industrial partners and SMEs, and this is very essential, because basically what that would involve the process of reducing the time between coming up with a solution and take it to the market and implement it. And so we have SMEs, academia, stakeholders, citizens, and local governmental bodies all together working on an integrated solution that would benefit everybody, using what we, the co-design, co-create solution. Also, as part of a SCORE, we are really we were very aware about the financial sustainability of solutions, because normally what will happen is we have too many challenges. One would be the acceptance of the solution by the citizens, most importantly, and different users, and that can be tackled by the Coastal City Living Lab approach and how we can work together. And the second thing would be how we can make the solution sustainable in terms of financial. So SCORE will also work on developing financial products like insurance policy products and all these kind of stuff, to ensure the financial sustainability of those products. So it's basically trying to provide a whole package in terms of tools that can be adopted by other cities and in order to increase climate resilience. In the consortium, as I mentioned, we have 28 partners. Those 28 partners include 10 cities, research and development organizations. We have also industrial partners, public sector research organizations like National Research Center in Italy, for example, and we also have cities and city councils, including the City Council, which is very important to involve them, and that's why we have this kind of a large consortium with international partners. Everybody used to do things in different styles, so you'll find that some of the cities have no citizen involvement in developing the solution. It will come up like straight away from the city councils, I suppose, or local governmental bodies. And some of them will have like public consultations. Some of them would have groups that would be involved with the planning and so on. So there are different experiences around the consortium. And what we're trying to do is to put to use this concept of coastal city living lab, which will allow everybody to be involved and will allow the cycle of the feedback to be continuous. So we'll always get feedback from all the participants of the coastal city living lab in order to improve the function of the solution. I suppose that's what I want to mention about score. Give ideas. I would allow maybe more time for the interesting discussions to come up, the questions, which everybody, I would say, is looking forward, like Ronan, Brian, and Conor, and myself.
That's brilliant, Salim. No small task fitting in a major EU project in about 10 minutes. Thanks very much. I might ask the other panelists if they wouldn't mind turning on their cameras. And thank you to everybody for all the questions. I think what Salim said about testing the technologies in Dublin from across Europe is almost a good, it's a larger scale of what we're doing in Sandyford. We're testing what's going on in Dublin in a small little area. And so you can see how these things scale, and bringing all these partners together is really what we're trying to talk about today. So let's jump into the questions. So the first one, and thank you everyone for the questions so far. So the first one is from Kira K. Really interesting to hear about the strong collaboration between the key partners. Focus on sustainable travel in the country is great, as is the new coastal mobility route. Outside of the key coastal areas, the cycling infrastructure is limited. What measures are planned to ensure a significant modal shift to active travel in Sandyford and other urban areas in DLR? And she continues, but I think that question was actually asked just before Brian's talk, and I think you've covered a reasonable amount of Brian in terms of some of the activities. I think if I'll just jump in before handing over to you, Brian, there are also these things aren't just for the council to provide. I think private businesses is also acting as well. So within Sandyford, certainly I know some of the major corporates are offering bike schemes, private bike share schemes for their customers, or for their own employees, and they also offer private buses as well to get onto the Lewis and the Dart. So it's not just the council, but the council does obviously offer those sort of schemes like the cargo bike share, looking at putting in new bike lanes in Sandyford hopefully in the next year. And obviously the sensors and things that we do as well. But Brian, you probably have a much more in-depth idea of what's going on.
No, not really. I was just going to say that the NTA review of the GDA will be out soon, and that has a lot in it. I'm on the steering group for that. There's a lot in that on cycling and other modes of transport and the plans going forward. But as I said in my talk, I think pilots are fantastic, and put things in, see if they're used. If they're not working, then change them. It's not as if a cycle lane is set in stone, but it's not something that you can't move around.
Yeah. Ronan, this one might be for you. Why do you think there's been such a success in Dún Laoghaire with active travel and increasing cycle lanes, while recently in Sandymount they decided not to close the beach road to make it inaccessible to cyclists? And what do you think should be done?
Straight in with the hard question for me, Conor. Yeah. Yeah, there's a balance to be struck, and it's really difficult to figure out exactly where that balance should sit. As a local authority, we need to manage the infrastructure in the county in a way that works for people. And the pandemic meant that things needed to change fast. And it was a very obvious project that could really help with social distancing and allow people to get out into the fresh air. But if we had taken on a project like the coastal mobility route a number of years previously, how far would we have gotten with public consultation, and how quick would we be able to do it? That's not to say that there isn't a place for public consultation. What I'm saying is that there's a balance to be struck, and that we need in local authorities to have the ability to try things to see, do they work? Because often people will engage. They will engage much better when they have a real understanding of what the project actually is. It would have been fantastic to have the opportunity, to ask the same question twice if you had a time machine, do public consultation on the coastal mobility route as it was proposed, and then go ahead and build it and do the same public consultation and see how different the answers would be the people would give when they actually see what happens. Because anecdotally, people don't understand it until they use it. For example, like I'm a cyclist myself, and I cycle with a group out in Kildare, even though I live in Dublin. But recently we were finishing up a Sunday cycle by going for a swim in Sea Point. And one of my cycling buddies said to me, "Oh, so we'll be going on this coastal mobility route. That'll be class." And I'm going, "Yeah, absolutely." He's going like, it's segregated cycle lanes. We can absolutely nail it. I was going, nah, completely the opposite. Is that what you're going to see is you're going to get on segregated cycle paths. There's going to be 2-year-olds on bikes. It's really, really cool. It's in the open air. And he's like, as a cyclist, he turned to me as soon as he was on it, and he was like, "This is completely brilliant. This isn't what I thought it was. I thought this was kind of like a Grand Prix course for cyclists to nail along with their head down." It's like this. I said, "No, this is a really slow cycling lane compared to what you would do out in the Wicklow Mountains or whatever. But it's fun. It's families. It's kids." And again, I know I use this phrase again and again, but if you don't see it, you can't be it. So a project like the coastal mobility route allows people, everybody in the greater Dublin area, to see what the potential is for this city. So the kind of questions that we're getting asked as a local authority now is, so you have that coastal mobility route, should that not run all the way around the bay? And absolutely, it should. But obviously there's a balance to be struck around public consultation and figuring out how to do it best so that it works for everybody, for all of the stakeholders on the ground. The other point I would make, without over-labouring the answer, is that infrastructure is just part of what we do in local authorities. The other part of it is it's the modal shift, the soft part, the hearts and minds. So when you look at projects around active travel, they're not necessarily putting in new cycle lanes. A lot of the time it can be taking existing cycle lanes and going, well, how could we work with, for example, the schools in active transport for kids getting to, how can we work with the kids in the schools, with the teachers, to get more people using cycle lanes, maybe by cycling in groups to and from school, organising school bus gangs where the kids all cycle together with adults. So there's a lot that can be done.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ronan. 2 quick questions. We might fly through some of these questions. Great to see so many. Salim, 2 for you. Why is potential damage from storms or sea level rise to residential buildings not listed as an impact for Dublin? I think this is referring to the slide with the impact factors. Yeah.
Well, quickly on this. All right. If it's not listed on that map, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But we know that it's there and it's a problem. It's kind of the best use of the resources. As you know, Conor, we are also involved in another European project called Random, which covers particularly that area. So in terms of having a network of cities, like working together and learning from each other, we're covering that in the 3 other cities that have a front runner role in this problem. and they already advanced like in protecting citizens and that. So it's basically it's kind of distributing the roles and in order to maximize the gain out of the projects within the 4 years. So that's the main problem. It's not it's not one of the challenges that will be tackled for Dublin directly, but Dublin will be learning for that particular one in terms of the financial products and socio-economic assessment and protection from other cities. And likewise, Dublin will be providing the lead in protecting commercial and network and then transportation networks of the city against sea level rise. So it's kind of like distributing the role, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. One from Aisling here: how does the consultation take place? Are other methods used as well as online surveys? This is in relation to our work, Aisling. Yeah, we've a range of different approaches. We use workshops. We go out for one-on-one interviews. We use surveys, online surveys, in-person surveys. And we also use a lot of GIS to map different layers of data that we have from various different data sets across the city to inform our things. The consultation for actual infrastructure with the council is different, and you'd have to go onto the Dún Laoghaire website to get more on that. I think this is a good question for everybody from Will O'Brien from ZIP. This week, the government announced plans for new powers for local authorities that will allow them to do experimental measures and evaluate their performance after 18 months. This should give councils like Dún Laoghaire the power to trial things in a similar manner to how they did with great success on the coastal mobility route. What sorts of initiatives would you like to see trialed in local authorities to deal with climate emergency given these new powers? Whoever wants to jump in can.
Like to see Beach Road opened up and the coastal mobility route running all the way around Dublin Bay. I know it's bold, but absolutely it can be done. There are pinch points, but they can be figured out.
I think in terms of a scheme to trial, I think a greater car sharing trial would be very useful, and it's probably more long term, but reducing the parking allotments to new builds and existing builds that facilitate car movements, I think would be a good one, and obviously scooters as well. Will.
Yeah, well. Yeah, I 100% I would agree with Brian about car sharing model, because that will it's all about reducing emissions, which we all aim for, and also in terms of the climate change and increasing resilience is we really would like to see that emissions reduced, so we can kind of decrease the impact as much as possible, and emissions is one of the main things. I would say more cycling, less maybe more car sharing if more use of public transportation, let's say. Yeah.
Brilliant. I just see the time there. We're just out of time, so I'd just really like to thank our panelists for their time today, and thank you for everybody else for joining us. And a final thank you to our partners, Smart Dublin, Dún Laoghaire Down, Connect and Enable in Trinity. Brilliant chat, and looking forward to a few more events for Climate Action Week as well. If you'd like to get in touch with myself or any of the panelists, you can give me an email. It's conor.dowling@smartsandyford.ie, and I'll be happy to go into more detail on any of the questions. Thank you all very much. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you.